and that risks are small and easily manageable, urging us not to reject an entire industry because of a slapdash investigation, legal issues, and scientific shortcomings they argue, or physical exploration as a means to evaluate the worth of fracking in South Africa. But an understanding that thousands of gas wells, probably more than 10,000, will be required to extract a meaningful quantity of gas proves that shale gas mining in South Africa is no small affair. And so the threat to our resources, to our water resources, belies the claim of small and easily manageable, establishing a convincing case for the motion, fracking threatens our water resources.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I would like now to invite the first speaker against the motion, fracking threatens our water resources, Ivo Venter, to put his case to you. And Ivo writes on economic, political, technological, and environmental subjects, and is the author of Extreme Environment, a book on how environmental exaggeration harms emerging economies.
Good morning. Shale gas does have implications for water resources, but I do not believe that it poses a threat. There are indeed three core issues. Where will they get the water? Does it pollute anything down the hole? And what happens with the wastewater? So, first, modern shale gas drilling uses less water than conventional gas. A Harvard study found it uses less water than any other fossil fuel nowadays. Biofuel, which environmentalists so love, uses nearly 1,000 times more water. Some of the fracturing methods don't use any water at all. But if we see the worst, the scary number of 20 million litres per well, context matters. South Africa's golf courses use enough water every year to frack 15,000 wells. If you drew that from the Marine Dam, you need 3% of its total capacity once more. In Texas, which is water stressed, like the Karoo, shale gas accounts for only 1.7% of total freshwater use. Shell promised not to compete with Karoo residents for water. In fact, they say that they will leave the Karoo with more water than they found it. This is actually plausible, but breaking even seems acceptable to me. The second charge is that shale gas drilling will pollute freshwater aquifers. But fracking happens several kilometers deeper than shallow groundwater. There is no evidence that pollution is a widespread risk, and no anecdotal claims have survived regulatory investigations. Ordinary surface spills occasionally happen, but they do in any industry, and even those are rare. Consider this: a leaking well is useless. Even if the industry did not care about the environment, it does care whether a well that costs as much as an Nkandla upgrade can actually produce gas. The third question is what happens to wastewater. This is not a new or unique problem. Most wastewater simply gets recycled and the rest can easily be treated. The latest technology is called zero discharge water management systems and produces no waste at all. To the best of our knowledge, the risks to our water resources are indeed small and manageable. Any remaining questions can only be answered by exploration. Blindly taking risks is dangerous, but we are not blind. An excessive risk aversion can cause just as much harm.
Thank you, Ivo. And now speaking for the motion, fracking threatens our water resources, is Desikan Naidu, CEO of the Water Research Commission, which is South Africa's only dedicated water research steering and funding institution.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I think it goes straight from Ivo's point. One of the biggest lessons of the United States is when the boom gets ahead of the Noah on the science, there is a very high price to pay. And some of the comments that you've just heard is reflecting some of that lack of science. Yes, indeed, when compared to other mining activities, the amount of water needed for fracking is much lower, but it really depends on where you do it. So if you did this in a high rainfall region that was water rich, this debate would be completely different. We happen to be wanting to do it in one of the driest areas of the country and one of the most environmentally sensitive areas of the country. The second issue is that we don't really know about what's happening in the groundwater in Karoo. There are some surface aquifers, there are also some very deep aquifers. So the opportunity to pollute the existing groundwater resources is indeed a very real one. The issue about zero waste is not realizable in the short term. The reality is that the way we treat this water is a fundamental part about how we need to take this debate forward. Because apart from the usual pollution risks and how to deal with the egress of water, we also have to deal with the health issues associated with this, which we will expand later in the discussion. But the last point I want to make, as part of the introductory remarks, is the entire equation around the risk nature of this exercise actually depends very fundamentally on what we intend to do with the shale gas. Because there's a huge difference if we want to use it here locally in South Africa or if we want to export it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And to argue that fracking does not threaten our water resources, we now have Omfi Apane, who is Department of Energy Deputy Director General for Policy, Planning and Clean Energy.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Maybe just to start off, I'd like to just clarify a few things related to definitions, and then I'll go into the thrust of my argument. And it goes something along these lines that we have to be very sure that we're referring to the same thing, so that we can conduct the right debate. Let's not define fracking to mean the entire process of developing an oil or gas well, because that's not what fracking is. Let's rather use a definition that is very familiar, which relates to hydraulic fracking being the simulation of a well process used to maximize the extraction of underground resources, including oil, natural gas, even water. It is not the entire process of drilling, casing a well, and producing oil and natural gas. It is one step. Now, against that background, the U.S. Department of Energy and the Groundwater Protection Council has determined, and I quote, based on over 60 years of practical application and the lack of evidence to the contrary, there is nothing to indicate that when coupled with appropriate well construction, the practice of hydraulic fracking in deep formations endangers groundwater. There is a lack of demonstrated evidence that hydraulic fracking conducted in many shallow formations presents a substantial loss of endangerment to groundwater. And by the end of this year, in 2014, the Environmental Protection Agency in the US intends to publish for comment their report entitled "The Study of the Potential Impact of Hydraulic Fracturing on Drinking Water Resources."
We're going to have to leave it there. And now to our final speaker for the motion, fracking threatens our water resources. We have Mariette Lithran, chairperson of the Federation for Sustainable Environment, which is a prominent environmental activist group within the mining sector.
I do not have profundity in the fracking, but my experience is in the gold mining industry and its long-term impacts upon groundwater. I shall therefore, by analogous reasoning, adduce evidence to suggest that it is highly plausible, because of weaknesses and failures in our current regulatory regime and framework, that the profound and irreversible impacts of gold mining on our groundwater ecology may be perpetuated in the case of fracking. Unless the regulatory regime is optimized to establish proactive management and mitigation measures, to implement the precautionary principle or risk-averse principle if there are uncertainties or gaps of information, to implement and enforce the polluter pays principle, also the retrospective application of the polluter pays principle, to quantify non-current or residual or latent impacts which may manifest hundreds of years after fracking has stopped, to internalize externalities and not to externalize it on future generations' immune environment or communities, to enforce environmental legislations and the terms and conditions of water use license and environmental management program reports, to implement cooperative governments on a vertical and a horizontal level, to ensure that there are sufficient rehabilitation funds to address the lifetime of the impacts that may continue for hundreds of years, and to ensure that there are sustainable land uses with associated resources watered after fracking. Unless these failures and weaknesses are not addressed, we shall perpetuate the long-term and adverse impacts on groundwater and the ecology as we have witnessed in the gold mining industry.
Thank you, Mariette. And now the final statement against the motion will be made by Philame Kingston, a partner in the oil and gas sector group of Weber Wenzel Attorneys.
Thank you, Sabina, and good morning to the listeners. Shale gas presents an incredible opportunity with tremendous economic benefits for all. in the context of the shale gas reserves in Karoo, which are estimated at 390 TCFs, there are 2 points that I'd like to make. The first is that in terms of energy security, it is estimated that the reserves that are available in the Karoo would meet our energy requirements for the next 310 years. That is significant. Secondly, in the context of job creation, they would create at least 850,000 jobs, according to a report by Econometrics. The second point I'd like to make is that as responsible citizens in this country, we need to really move away from emotion and alarmist statements that ultimately detract from our ability to focus on the risks in a sober-minded manner and to ensure that those risks are appropriately mitigated. It is incumbent on all of us to do this in order that we end up in a place that is the correct conclusion. To my mind, the fundamental issue here lies in the government creating a regulatory framework that ensures the success of fracking in the Karoo, which is done in a sustainable and responsible manner. The issue here for me as well is that monitoring shale gas fracking is ultimately what is important and should be what we are focusing on at all times.
And that's where we are going to leave it. We've heard from all the debaters here this morning, and the motion this morning is fracking threatens our water resources, and of course then the next round we'll be opening it up to the